Elizabeth, I need you to explain something to me. Why is a man named Marcus Chen running the multi-million-dollar manufacturing company I signed over to you 5 years ago? The question shattered the warm hum of Christmas dinner like a gunshot through glass.
Crash.
A sharp, violent sound cut through the silence. Across the table, my father Charles had knocked over his wine glass, deep red liquid spreading across the white linen like blood. I froze, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, a piece of turkey growing cold in midair. Slowly, so slowly it felt like moving through water, I lifted my eyes. My grandfather George's face was a mask of stern confusion, his jaw set in that way that meant he expected answers. Beside him, my grandmother Rose sat rigid, her expression carved from ice. They'd flown in from their winter home in Arizona just yesterday, and something about them seemed different now. Harder. Less forgiving. The room felt like it was closing in. "Grandpa, what did you just say?" My voice came out barely above a whisper, the words cracking at the edges. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tried to process what I'd just heard. A manufacturing company? Marcus Chen, my brother-in-law? What was he talking about? I'd never owned anything in my life except my 15-year-old Honda and a laptop I was still paying off in installments. Before I tell you how deep this betrayal goes, hit that subscribe button. Because what my family did next will make your blood boil, and you won't want to miss a single second of how I made them pay. Grandpa, there has to be some kind of mistake. I set my fork down carefully, my hands shaking. I don't own any company. I've never owned a company. I work freelance graphic design projects, mostly logos and website layouts. You know that. George's eyes narrowed, the lines around his mouth deepening. A mistake? Elizabeth, I have the paperwork in my briefcase upstairs. Rose, and I transferred couch manufacturing to you on your 25th birthday. 5 years ago this past September. The room tilted slightly. 5 years ago, I'd been scraping together rent money, living off ramen and the occasional client who actually paid on time. I'd celebrated my birthday alone in my studio apartment with a grocery store cupcake because I couldn't afford to go out. George, sweetheart, you're exhausted from the flight. My mother's voice cut in, smooth as silk and just as slippery. She reached across the table, her hand hovering near his arm. You and Rose have been traveling all day. The time zone change from Arizona can be so disorienting, especially at your age. Maybe we should. Don't patronize me, Amanda. Rose's voice could have frozen the wine in its decanter. We're 74, not senile. We know exactly what we signed, and when we signed it. My father cleared his throat, dabbing at the wine stains spreading across the tablecloth with his napkin. Mom, Dad, I think what Amanda means is that you might be misremembering some of the details. Estate planning can be complicated, and sometimes... Charles. George's single word silenced him instantly. Are you suggesting your mother, and I don't remember gifting our granddaughter the company we spent 40 years building? I glanced desperately at my sister. Joanne sat perfectly still, her face drained of color, staring at her untouched plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Her knuckles were white around her knife and fork. Joanne. I ventured. Do you know anything about this? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. She's probably just as confused as Elizabeth. My mother interjected quickly, her laugh brittle and false. George, Rose, why don't we table this discussion until after dinner? We can look through your documents tomorrow when everyone's had a good night's sleep and...
No.
Rose stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound made everyone jump. We're discussing this now. Because when I called the company's main office yesterday to arrange a holiday gift basket for the employees, the receptionist told me the CEO was someone named Marcus Chen. Her gaze locked onto Joanne like a laser. Your husband, if I'm not mistaken. Joanne's fork clattered onto her plate. Rose didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out of the dining room, her heels clicking against the floor with military precision. The silence she left behind was suffocating. My mother's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Rose, there's really no need to." But my grandmother was already returning, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She set it on the table with a deliberate thud, pushing aside the centerpiece of pine boughs and red candles without ceremony. "These," she said, flipping open the portfolio, "are the original documents. Notarized, witnessed, and filed with the State Business Registry on September 15th, 5 years ago." She pulled out a stack of papers, the top sheet embossed with an official seal. Even from where I sat, I could see the formal legal language, the dense paragraphs that meant something important had happened that I knew nothing about. George stood and moved beside her, his reading glasses appearing from his jacket pocket. "We established the transfer as an irrevocable gift. Elizabeth and Couch, upon reaching her 25th birthday, became the sole owner of Couch Manufacturing LLC, including all assets, properties, and subsidiary holdings." My hands felt numb. But I never signed anything. I never even knew about this. "You didn't need to sign," Rose said, sliding a document across the table toward me. "This was a gift transfer. George and I signed as the grantors. Our attorney, Richard Morrison, handled the filing.
See?
Here's his signature as witness." I stared at the paper in front of me. There was my name, typed in official legal print. Elizabeth and Couch, grantee.
The date.
My grandparents' signatures, bold and clear. A notary seal, stamped and official. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered. "If I owned a company worth millions, wouldn't someone have told me? Wouldn't there have been? I don't know, tax documents? Legal notices? That's exactly what we'd like to know," George said, his voice cold. He pulled out another sheet. "According to our records, all corporate correspondence was to be sent to your address. We provided it to Morrison at the time, 1247 Maple Street, apartment 3B. That had been my address. 5 years ago, that tiny studio with the leaking ceiling and the radiator that only worked on Tuesdays. I never got anything," I said, my voice rising. "No letters, no documents, nothing. I've been living paycheck to paycheck while apparently owning a—" My throat closed around the words. My father shifted in his seat. "Perhaps there was an administrative error. Mail gets lost all the time and—" "For 5 consecutive years?" Rose's eyebrow arched. "Tax documents, quarterly reports, board meeting notices, all lost?" Joanne made a small, strangled sound. Her husband's name hung in the air between us, like poison. "Marcus Chen, CEO of my company." I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of what came next. The confusion I'd been wearing like a mask slipped away, and I met my grandparents' eyes with steady clarity. "Actually, Grandpa," I said quietly, "the quarterly reports for the last 3 years went to a P.O. box registered under Joanne and Marcus's names. The tax documents were rerouted through a change of address form filed with a forged signature." The silence that fell over the table was absolute. My mother's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" Rose's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "She's talking about the investigation we've been conducting for the past 3 weeks. "Investigation?" My father's voice came out strangled. George settled back into his chair, folding his hands on the table with the calm of a man holding all the cards. "It started when I was reviewing our investment portfolio in November. I like to verify all our holdings before year-end tax planning. I happened to check the Arizona Business Registry database, just routine due diligence, and noticed Couch Manufacturing listed with updated officer information. Marcus Chen, CEO," Rose added, her voice like cut glass. "We found that quite interesting, given that Elizabeth was supposed to be the owner." I watched my parents' faces drain of color in real time. Joanne had gone completely still, not even pretending to breathe. "We would have called Elizabeth directly," George continued, but we remembered how difficult it had been to reach her over the years. Phone numbers that didn't work. Addresses where mail got returned. So many unfortunate coincidences. So, we contacted my sister instead, Rose said. Patricia lives just 20 minutes from Elizabeth. We asked her to hand-deliver a letter. Aunt Patricia. I'd met her at a coffee shop 3 weeks ago, confused when she'd pass me an envelope and asked me not to open it until I got home. Inside had been my grandparents' phone number and a simple message. Call us immediately. Tell no one. Elizabeth and I have been speaking every other day since, George said. Usually while she's out on her morning walks, where certain people couldn't accidentally overhear. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. This is absurd. You're making it sound like some kind of conspiracy. That's exactly what it is, Amanda. Rose cut her off. A conspiracy to defraud Elizabeth of her inheritance while keeping George and me in the dark. We hired a forensic attorney, I said, my voice stronger now. Richard Morrison's son, actually. He's been very helpful in tracking down exactly where all those missing documents went. Joanne's chair scraped backward. I need to use the restroom. Sit down, George commanded, and my sister froze halfway to standing. No one is leaving this table until we finish this conversation. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. My father jerked in his seat like he'd been electrocuted. That would be Daniel Morrison, I said, standing. I invited him to join us for dessert. I walked to the front door with my heart pounding, but my step sure. Daniel Morrison stood on the porch, a tall man in his late 30s with his father's sharp eyes, carrying a briefcase that looked expensive and official. Miss Couch, he said with a slight nod. Shall we? My mother was on her feet when we returned to the dining room. This is a family dinner. You can't just bring your lawyer. Actually, Mrs. Couch, I'm here representing both Elizabeth and her grandparents, Daniel said smoothly, setting his briefcase on the sideboard. And what we're discussing concerns the entire family, so my presence seems appropriate. He opened the briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder. I've spent the last 2 weeks reviewing correspondence between Mr. and Mrs. George Couch and their son and daughter-in-law. The findings are quite illuminating. My father's jaw clenched. Whatever you think you've found. Let's start with this email from 18 months ago, Daniel interrupted, pulling out a printed page. From Charles Couch to George and Rose Couch. Subject line. Concerns about Elizabeth. Quote, Mom and Dad, I hate to worry you, but we've discovered Elizabeth has developed a serious gambling problem. She's been spending weekends in Atlantic City and has racked up significant debts. My breath caught. What? I've never been to Atlantic City in my life, I said, my voice shaking with anger now instead of fear. Daniel continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Here's another from Amanda Couch, sent 3 months later. Rose, I'm heartbroken to tell you that Elizabeth was fired from another job. That's 3 positions in 2 years. Her supervisors cited unreliability and unprofessional behavior. We're very concerned about her stability. I was never fired, I said through gritted teeth. I've been freelance by choice since college. Rose's face had gone rigid with fury. They told us you couldn't hold down a job, that you were struggling with responsibility. There's more, Daniel said, flipping through the pages. December, 2 years ago. Dad, we had to lend Elizabeth money again to cover her credit card bills. She's accumulated over $15,000 in debt from irresponsible spending, designer clothes, expensive dinners. We're worried she's not mature enough to handle financial responsibilities. George's hand slammed down on the table, making the dishes rattle. We asked you about giving Elizabeth a position at the company. You said she wasn't ready, that she needed to grow up first. You painted a picture of someone completely incompetent, Rose added, her voice deadly quiet. Someone who would destroy everything we'd built. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. We were trying to protect your legacy. By lying. I demanded. Daniel Morrison pulled out another document, this one sealed in a clear plastic evidence sleeve. Of course, the emails were just the setup. The real crime is this. He laid it on the table with the care of someone handling a live bomb. Even through the protective plastic, I could see the official letterhead, Power of Attorney Authorization. This document, Daniel said, was allegedly signed by Elizabeth 4 years ago, granting Marcus Chen full operational authority over couch manufacturing, including the right to appoint himself as CEO and make all executive decisions. I leaned forward, staring at the signature at the bottom. Elizabeth A. Couch, written in a handwriting that looked almost like mine, but wasn't quite right. The loops were wrong. The slant was off. I never signed that, I whispered. We know, George said grimly. Daniel opened his briefcase again and withdrew a second plastic sleeve containing what looked like the same document, but covered in yellow and pink highlighting. We had this analyzed by 3 separate forensic document examiners. The findings were unanimous. He pointed to the signature. First, the handwriting analysis. Elizabeth provided us with samples of her signature from various periods of her life: old checks, lease agreements, college enrollment forms. The signature on this power of attorney matches none of them. The pressure points are wrong, the letter formation is inconsistent, and there are hesitation marks suggesting someone was copying rather than signing naturally. Joanne made a small whimpering sound. My mother shot her a look that could have melted steel. But the signature analysis is almost beside the point, Daniel continued, because of what we discovered about the paper itself. He pulled out a lab report with a letterhead I recognized from crime shows, a forensic analysis company. This document is allegedly 4 years old, dated November 2021. However, the paper stock, this specific blend with these particular fiber markers, wasn't manufactured until January 2023. We verified this with the paper mill directly. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. That's impossible, my father said, but his voice had no conviction. The watermark code is right here, Daniel said, pointing to faint markings visible under the highlighting. This paper literally did not exist when Elizabeth supposedly signed this document, which means this power of attorney was created sometime in the last 2 years and backdated. George's face had turned a dangerous shade of red. You forged legal documents to steal from my granddaughter. We can explain, my mother started. Forgery is a felony, Daniel said calmly, as is fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and theft by deception. And that's just the criminal side. The civil liability for stolen corporate profits over 4 years is substantial. Marcus's name appeared in my mind again. He'd been living off my company, in my position with my money. Where is Marcus tonight? I asked Joanne, my voice cold. Interesting that he couldn't make it to Christmas dinner. My sister's face crumpled. I know some of you watching this have your own stories about family betrayal. Drop a comment and let me know, am I overreacting, or would you have done the same thing? And if you're finding strength in the story, subscribe so you never miss another one. Daniel didn't wait for Joanne to answer. He was already pulling out more documents, these ones with glossy photos attached. Let's talk about lifestyle discrepancies, he said, spreading them across the table like a dealer laying out cards. 4 years ago, when Marcus Chen assumed the CEO position at Couch Manufacturing, he was working as a mid-level project manager at a tech startup, making approximately $72,000 a year. He slid a photo forward. A modest townhouse with beige siding and a small front yard. This was where Joanne and Marcus lived at the time. A 2-bedroom rental in Riverside.
Monthly rent, $1,400.
Another photo. This one showed a sprawling colonial with a 3-car garage, professional landscaping, and a brick facade that screamed money. This is where they live now. Purchased 18 months ago for $850,000. Cash offer, no mortgage. My mother's face had gone gray. The CEO's salary at Couch Manufacturing, Daniel continued, his voice methodical, is $240,000 annually, plus performance bonuses that have averaged an additional $90,000 per year. Marcus has also awarded himself stock options and profit-sharing arrangements that have netted him approximately $160,000 in additional compensation. I did the math in my head, feeling sick. Over $500,000 a year. Money that should have been mine. George's hands were shaking. Show her the rest. Daniel pulled out more photos. A silver Mercedes SUV with a red bow on it, clearly a gift. A yacht, an actual yacht, docked at some marina with Joanne and Marcus raising champagne glasses on the deck. Beach photos from what looked like the Maldives or Bora Bora, crystal clear water and overwater bungalows. 2 weeks in French Polynesia last summer, Daniel narrated. First-class flights. A private villa that cost $12,000 a night. There's also the ski trips to Aspen, the wine tours through Tuscany, and a rather expensive 40th birthday party for Joanne at a country club that cost $47,000. Each photo felt like a slap. While they'd been living like celebrities, I'd been choosing between paying my electric bill and buying groceries. I'd driven my Honda until the transmission died, then spent 6 months taking buses because I couldn't afford the repair. Elizabeth's tax returns for the same period tell a different story, Daniel said quietly, mercifully putting the photos away. 4 years ago, she earned $23,000. Last year, she earned $31,000. Her savings account currently has a balance of $812. The number hung in the air, naked and humiliating. Rose stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. You stole millions from her. You watched her struggle while you lived like royalty on money that was hers. We were protecting the company, my father said desperately. Elizabeth wasn't ready. Elizabeth wasn't ready? George roared. Or she wasn't compliant enough to let you control her inheritance. Joanne's phone buzzed on the table. She grabbed for it like a lifeline, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Her face went white as she read the screen. It's Marcus, she whispered. He says his lawyer told him not to come tonight. He says, her voice broke. He says we need to talk about protecting our assets. Protecting your assets? I repeated, my voice sharp enough to cut. You mean my assets that you stole? I didn't steal anything. Joanne's composure finally shattered. Tears streamed down her face, her carefully applied mascara running in black rivulets. This wasn't my idea. Mom and Dad said you'd ruin the company, that you'd run it into the ground, that Grandma and Grandpa would lose everything they'd worked for. Joanne, shut up, my mother hissed. But my sister wasn't listening anymore. The dam had broken. They said it was temporary, she sobbed. They said Marcus would just manage things until you got your act together, and then we'd transition it back to you. But then the money started coming in, and Marcus said we'd earned it, that he was the one actually running the company, and you decided you liked being rich more than you liked having integrity. I finished coldly. Daniel Morrison's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and stepped away from the table. I could hear his low voice in the hallway. Yes, I see. And he's willing to provide that in writing. He returned a moment later, his expression carefully neutral. That was Marcus Chen's attorney. Mr. Chen would like it known that he was operating under false pretenses. He claims that Charles and Amanda Couch presented him with legal documentation showing they had power of attorney over Elizabeth's assets due to her alleged mental health issues and gambling addiction. What? My father lurched to his feet. That's a lie. He knew exactly what. So, you're admitting you gave him fraudulent documents? Daniel asked mildly. My father's mouth snapped shut. Marcus is prepared to testify, Daniel continued, that he was told Elizabeth had signed off on the arrangement but was too unstable to participate in corporate operations. He's offering full cooperation with investigators in exchange for consideration regarding charges. That bastard. My mother breathed. We made him. He was nothing before. Before you handed him my company, I said. Joanne was crying harder now, her whole body shaking. Dad, what do we do? Marcus is throwing us under the bus. He's going to say it was all your idea. It was their idea, my father shouted, pointing at George and Rose. They're the ones who gave the company to the wrong granddaughter. Elizabeth can't even balance a checkbook. You think she could run a manufacturing operation? I run a successful freelance business, I said quietly. I've managed my finances for years. I was poor because you sabotaged me, not because I'm incompetent. The truth of it settled over the room like ash. Blue and red lights suddenly washed through the dining room windows, painting the walls in alternating colors. My mother's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. That would be the police, Daniel said, checking his watch. Right on schedule. The doorbell rang, a harsh, official sound. I stood and walked to the door, my legs steadier than I'd expected. 2 officers stood on the porch, their expressions professionally neutral. Behind them, a patrol car sat in the driveway, its lights still spinning. Miss Couch? I'm Officer Rodriguez. We have warrants for Charles Couch, Amanda Couch, and Joanne Chen. I stepped aside. They're in the dining room. My father was already on his feet when the officers entered, his hands raised as if that would somehow stop what was coming. Now wait just a minute. We can work this out as a family. There's no need to involve the authorities. Mr. Charles Couch, Officer Rodriguez said, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and theft by deception. You have the right to remain silent. Elizabeth, please, my mother begged, her voice cracking. We're your parents. You can't do this to us. Think about what this will do to the family. I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework, who'd also spent years systematically destroying my reputation and stealing my future. You already destroyed this family, I said quietly. Years ago, when you decided money was more important than your daughter. We gave you everything, my father shouted as Rodriguez pulled his arms behind his back. The click of handcuffs was sickeningly loud. We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. And then you stole millions from me while I was eating ramen for dinner and wondering how I'd make rent. Amanda Couch was crying now, mascara-stained tears streaming down her face as the second officer approached her. Lizzie, baby, please. We made a mistake. We can fix this. Family forgives family. You don't want your own mother in jail. You're right, I said. I don't want it. But you've earned it. Joanne didn't resist when they handcuffed her. She just kept crying, her whole body shaking with sobs that might have moved me if I hadn't seen the photos of her yacht. Daniel stepped forward, holding a thick legal document. Before you take them, officers, I need to serve these civil complaints. He handed papers to each of them in turn. Charles Couch, Amanda Couch, Joanne Chen, and Marcus Chen are being sued jointly and severally for $4.5 million in stolen compensation, punitive damages, and legal fees. My father's face went purple. $4.5 million? We don't have that kind of. The house in Riverside will be a good start, Daniel said pleasantly. Along with the Mercedes, the boat, and any remaining corporate compensation. We've already filed for asset freezes. Elizabeth, please. My mother's voice rose to a shriek as the officer guided her toward the door. We're your family. I watched them being led out into the cold December night, my grandparents standing on either side of me like pillars of stone. No, I said to the empty room. You were my family. Now you're just criminals who happen to share my DNA. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, basting a turkey that actually looked like the ones in magazines. Warm light spilled through the windows overlooking 3 acres of rolling hills, the kind of property I'd once scrolled past on real estate websites, just to daydream. Elizabeth, dear, do you need help with anything? Aunt Patricia appeared in the doorway, holding a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my old monthly grocery budget. I think I've got it, I said, smiling. But you could set that on the dining table. Grandma and Grandpa should be here any minute. The dining table. Custom-made oak that seated 8 comfortably, positioned in a room with a fireplace and built-in bookshelves. My home office was upstairs, overlooking the garden I planned to start in spring. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and a 2-car garage where my new Lexus sat next to the guest space I kept open for my grandparents when they visited. I'd bought the land with my first dividend check from Couch Manufacturing. The house had taken 4 months to build, every detail chosen by me. The doorbell rang, and I wiped my hands on my apron, an actual apron, not a dish towel tucked into my waistband, before heading to the door. "Merry Christmas." Rose pulled me into a hug the moment I opened it, her arms strong despite her 74 years. George followed, carrying a wrapped box that looked suspiciously expensive. "The place looks beautiful, sweetheart," he said, kissing my cheek. "Even better than the photos you sent." We settled around the table an hour later, the turkey golden and perfect, side dishes arranged like something from a cooking show. It was just the 4 of us, small, intimate, exactly what I wanted. "A toast," George said, raising his glass. "To Elizabeth, who has increased company profits by 18% in 6 months, launched 2 new product lines, and somehow managed to fix every problem Marcus Chen created while he was busy buying boats." Here, Aunt Patricia said, clinking her glass against mine. I'd stepped into Couch Manufacturing in February, like a general entering a battlefield. The staff had been wary at first. After all, I was the owner who'd mysteriously never shown up, now suddenly appearing to replace their CEO. But the books told the real story. Marcus had been coasting, making safe decisions, avoiding risks. He'd been managing the company, not leading it. I'd spent the first month just listening, talking to floor managers, engineers, the sales team, finding out what they needed, what frustrated them, what opportunities they'd been trying to pitch to Marcus that he'd ignored. Then I started making changes. "The settlement came through yesterday," I said, cutting into my turkey. "Mom, Dad, and Joanne's lawyers finally agreed to terms." Rose's expression hardened slightly. "And the house sold. Marcus's boat sold. Combined with the salary clawbacks and the liquidation of their other assets, I'm recovering $3.2 million. Not everything, but enough." "And them?" George asked quietly. 18 months for Dad, 14 for Mom. Joanne got 12 months and probation because she cooperated. I paused. Marcus is still fighting his charges. This journey from that chaotic Christmas dinner to this table right here taught me something. Your real family isn't always blood. If this story resonated with you, join our community by subscribing. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. I didn't feel triumphant saying it, just tired and maybe a little sad for the family that could have been. But then I looked around my table at the people who'd fought for me, who'd believed in me, who'd helped me claim the life I deserved, and the sadness faded. This was my family now. This was my empire. And I'd built it on truth instead of lies. "More wine?" I asked, smiling. "I think we have a lot to celebrate."